Thomas Canavan, the Chief Operating Officer of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund and the Executive Director of the National Law Enforcement Museum. I'm so glad that you're joining us for this special five-part series, Law Enforcement Think Tanks, Shaping the Future of Policing. In these episodes, we'll hear from incredible leaders working behind the scenes to improve law enforcement in ways that we don't often hear about. For many of us, it might seem like policing has always been the way that it is today, but that's far from the truth. What we learn in movies, TV shows, music, and the media rarely captures the full picture. In reality, dozens of organizations led by law enforcement, policy, criminal justice, and public safety experts are constantly shaping and improving the profession. In this series, we'll introduce you to five of these organizations and the leaders behind them. Chris Shung, Executive Director of The Curve, Paul Goldenberg, Senior Fellow at the Miller Center for Policing and Community Resilience at Rutgers University, Ben Haiman, Executive Director of the Center for Public Safety and Justice at the University of Virginia, Jim Bierman, founder of the Future Policing Institute, and Rosa Brooks, co-director of the Center on Innovations and Community Safety at Georgetown University. Each guest brings a unique perspective and decades of experience. Their stories will challenge assumptions, spark new ideas, and highlight the work being done to keep communities safe. Each of our guests' bios and links to their organizations can be found in the episode descriptions. Also, we recorded one introduction for the whole series, so when you start the next episode, you can skip directly to where our conversation begins. Thank you again for joining us today, and enjoy the conversations. All right, Ben. Well, thank you so much for joining me today to have this conversation.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on, and really looking forward to this.
So we're gonna take a deep dive into your education, your career. Gonna scan through a couple of the positions that you've held, but I'm really excited to talk about your role at University of Virginia. So we will spend a little bit of time there, but I wanted to start with your undergraduate education. It's very interesting. You began focusing on a subject that is perhaps a bit different than the work you're doing now. So I was hoping you could start there.
Yeah, well, my original goal of life was to be a high school math teacher. For my undergraduate education, I studied mathematics at the University of Iowa. And as much as it doesn't sound related to law enforcement, I found myself relying and pulling upon that education experience, every year in my career. Early in my career, and I'm sure we'll get into this, I was an application software developer, directly tied to mathematics. And what I've learned is, everything that deals with logic and decision making, there's usually a mathematical background. So I've been able to pull on that. Being a high school math teacher itself, someday I'll get back to that. But certainly that was where I started this law enforcement adventure.
So after you graduated with a degree in math, your next degree, your master's, was at the Police Executive Leadership Program at Johns Hopkins. How was that experience? And was it a lot different than, I assume, the approach that it requires a math degree?
It was. So I had, many great mentors on the Metropolitan Police Department, and the Metropolitan Police Department had long sent individuals through the Johns Hopkins Public Executive Leadership Program, really for public safety. And I was encouraged to apply for it, and it was an excellent opportunity. Met great colleagues from not only within law enforcement but other related public service disciplines. That was much different, as you suggest, than mathematics. It really was more based on management and leadership concepts, looking at running complex organizations. Through that, I was able to do a lot of work and look at issues of police recruitment and retention and attracting individuals into the policing profession. Well after my graduation from the program, I stayed in touch with many of the faculty members, they were very helpful in a lot of the further career pieces that I would do. But it was a really great network, and I'm still in touch to this day with many of the colleagues that I graduated with.
So did that program pull from departments? Were they majority local students?
It was, yeah. Majority were in the Baltimore, DC, Philadelphia. There were some that were a little bit further out. My particular cohort was a hybrid program, so some in person, some virtual in between. And so it allowed people that were a little bit further away to be able to participate and join. And obviously that wouldn't be the case if it was all in person in Baltimore. But we enjoyed our in residence time. It was a great chance to get to know each other and really then to connect in the virtual space in between.
Yeah. And then you went on, that wasn't enough. You went on to get your doctorate as well, your PhD.
Almost there. So
Oh, you're not finished yet.
I am still in the throes of it, and I wish I could claim that was in the rearview mirror, but it will be soon. That actually, I have continued to learn throughout my career, and that's one of the things that I've just picked up from mentors of mine is you just have to keep learning and being involved and engaged. And so I had the great fortune of participating in a research trip to Sweden, looking at issues around community police relations and all sorts of other issues that were there. And then also to the UK. And during that trip, I happened to spend a little bit of time at Staffordshire University in the West Midlands area. And during that trip, I really hit it off with some of the program staff, and I was talking about looking at different models of education in Europe for law enforcement and ways that could be used in consideration for American law enforcement. And the director of their Institute of Policing said, "Well, you could consider studying that with us." And the thought hadn't really crossed my mind, but I then wrote up a proposal on it, submitted it, was accepted, and have been working my way through the PhD program there, and hope in the near future that I will be a graduate of that program.
Awesome. Well, we'll get into some how that ties into some of the other work that you've been doing over the last couple of years. But I'm just curious, kind of how you've been able to balance family, work, continuing education, professional development. I mean, we didn't not even going to touch on the all the certifications, and the other trainings that you've done. And for anybody who's interested in seeking additional learning opportunities to help bolster their career or go in a different direction, like what's some advice and kind of strategies that you've used to be able to balance all of it?
Uh, that's a not so simple question, and the response is not so simple, right? I'm very fortunate to have an amazingly supportive family that encouraged me to continue to grow and challenge myself, both through professional education, but also through variety of different successive career positions. For individuals that are thinking about that next step and journey, you have to be hungry to continue to learn. Like, I don't believe you need education, and you'll probably hear me say this a couple times in our conversation, but I don't think you need formal higher education to be a very effective officer, but you do need the desire to continue to learn. And
Mhm.
that can look like training, that can look like education, through colleges and universities. That can look a lot of different, kind of ways to get to that. But at the end of the day, we are working in rapidly changing environments and ecosystems, and being able to really understand that and continue to push yourself to better understand the world around you is really critical. And so, my recommendation advice: find good mentors, find that kitchen cabinet of people that encourages you, that challenges you, that can push you along the way. But then also seek out opportunities that are going to kind of pull and push you in different directions. So, for me, some of the different non-degree programs that I've participated in, not any one of them in particular, I was like, oh, now I have all the tools in the tool chest. But each one added, a new tool into that tool chest. And so whether it was, a little bit of history and culture in this place, or whether it was a program about what was happening in Israel and Gaza long before the current conflict erupted, right? Like, those different courses and thoughts really exposed me to different ways of thinking and really pushed my leadership and management abilities forward. And so what I would tell people that are listening, of like, it's never too late to start. It doesn't have to be a formal degree. Take a class, go to a seminar, do something, but continue to put yourself in the mind of being just a consistent learner throughout your career.
Yeah, that's something that I noticed, and you probably noticed as well. Coming from a non-law enforcement background and career, what I found was that professional development is baked into this culture and it's nonstop. Officers are engaged in learning all the time, and it's really impressive to see, knowing their commitment, their time commitment to their communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's jump into some professional experience. Um, how did you get to Metropolitan PD here in Washington, D.C.?
So while I was studying to become a math teacher and actually had a job all lined up in California to go teach, was also volunteering and interning with a couple local police departments in the Midwest.
Mm,
And those were really interesting experiences. And riding with patrol deputies of small agencies in the middle of the night, doing inter-county jail transfers, helping to process individuals as they came into those type of environments. I got broad exposure into public safety and took a couple classes as well, and it intrigued me. And so I had applied for an internship with the Metropolitan Police in Washington, D.C. I thought big city policing, I was going to get some really interesting assignment like narcotics or detectives, something that really was unique to a big city. And I did get accepted in the program, and the placement I got was HR. And I thought, like, oh my God, like that is not what I was coming to law enforcement to do. And, it was one of the best kind of blessings that I've had in terms of opening up, a whole career of opportunities to me. But my family's all from the Washington area.
uh,
And so, came out to DC to spend what was to be a summer on my way to go teach, and turned into the start and continuation of my career from that point.
so, what surprised you about working within the police department?
Well, I mean, so much, right? And so, I remember both, coming on board and learning about all the different aspects of what a major city law enforcement operation entails, to really, in my placement, my initial placement in the world of human resources, how interconnected, the people are to the mission, right? And how, frankly, without the hardworking officers that are doing this work every single day, it's really just a set of policies and procedures, but the people are what make, that impact to the community, the connection to drive, the public safety mission forward. And so, every day throughout my career, there were things that I learned and I still do about, ways that we can do and improve public safety in better and different ways.
So you were there for 4 years. Is that and then you took a break? Is that
Yeah, I was there just about 5 years
uh,
for the initial stint. And so, in that time, when I was hired on full time, I worked in human resources, and it was probably the most accurate job title I've ever had. It was process improvement specialist.
mm,
And my goal was to make the hiring process for the department more efficient. And taught myself to program a variety of computer languages, built some IT systems for the agency to manage background investigations. Went on to work in IT and built a variety of broader personnel management systems, again, drawing on that mathematics background, drawing on that background, with computer programming and human resources. And then I had, unbelievable fortune to spend 2.5 years as the program manager running the recruiting division for the agency. And during that time, we hired well over 800 officers. And those officers, many of whom are still on the department today, but we really worked to decrease the time that it took for someone to come on. When I inherited the recruiting process in 2011, it was taking over 18 months for an individual on average to get hired. And we got that down to about 3.2 months to be exact. So some dramatic reductions in process. And so, it was a great pleasure to work with the recruiting team to reinvent kind of the strategy of what we were doing, to look at, systems and processes. And I started by kind of um, constructing the existing recruiting process into individual bite-sized chunks of who needs to touch the application, what do they need to do, and rethinking that to make it a more customer service and streamlined, approach. At this point, our agency was just really leveraging technology in a lot of different ways, and we saw some pretty dramatic increases and really a competitive advantage emerge between us and many other departments based on our strategy. That came into digital marketing and advertising. At this point, social media still wasn't huge, but it was beginning to be a thing. And so, really at the forefront of ways to attract people into the profession.
Um, so I wanted to ask just about maybe an example of some of those inefficiencies, and you might have um, touched on it, but with the technology piece, was that kind of a big factor? Or was it more of the process? And I'm curious if it sounds like the experience as a math major might have played a role in being able to kind of break down those pieces and those processes.
Yeah, so when you think about a recruitment process, it's just a bureaucratic process, right? And so, applicant puts in paperwork. There's a time until the agency contacts the applicant. So, like the first step that I did, and I still do this with agencies today, is like map out the applicant's journey, every step along the way. Map out the people that are involved. Are you dealing with different employees? If so, they take leave, they take vacation, they have time off, right? Like, what is that experience? And what we found is in the initial part of the process, 16 weeks of the average application journey was really to get to the first step, the written examination. And it was back and forth with scheduling, it was back and forth. And so we just truncated all of that. We did a brief orientation program, either virtual or online. And we had what was called a prospect day. Back then, we called it mass applicant processing. Prospect day has a much better ring to it than mass applicant processing. But that was a day every single week where 100 candidates would come in and they would do what was previously 16 weeks of the process, a physical ability test, a written examination. They would have an interview with a background investigator, go through frequently disqualifying pieces, get their fingerprints and photographs. And if they left that day, they had over a 50% chance of being hired because they'd
Mhm.
already cleared so much of the process. If they didn't lie, if they were medically, okay, they were going to be able to make it through. And so, when we looked at those different segments that rolled into that single day, those were different employees that had to reach out to the candidate and reach them and schedule them for something. And life gets busy, other things happen, and the candidates wouldn't show up, which would further delay. So the more we could get that into a single event, the more efficiency we had. And I worked with agencies all around the country on similar concepts, and everyone has had the same impact by doing that. Now, flash forward, we'll get to this, I'm sure, later in my career history when technology really became more prevalent. We did a lot of kind of better automation, better integration with social media platforms. But at that point, it was really around reducing redundancy. So we had series of reviews, right? And now it's fine if people are reviewing the case jacket if there's a role and a purpose and they know what they're looking for. But having a sergeant review it, a lieutenant review it, a captain review it, a director review it, an HR director review it, but they're all looking for the same thing, there's more efficient ways. And again, that sounds great if they all reviewed it in the next hour, but if it took a week between each of those review steps, it was a highly inefficient process. And so, a lot of what we did, yeah, it was mathematical in nature. We looked at the time it took. We took an average group of 25 people that got hired. We traced their application back. We figured out kind of the timeline where they cleared different waymarks in the application process, and we attacked the areas that had the longest, unnecessary long times. Could you walk out of your prospect day with a date for your polygraph? Sure, why not? Because if you're waiting 3 weeks to be then called for a polygraph, that was dead time where you potentially were being picked up by another agency. So really what we looked at is high performance. And we saw applicants as quick as 6 weeks from the time they said they were interested to they were sitting in the academy. Those were mostly right out of college, no life history, no baggage. But even candidates with considerable life history, we were still getting through in 5 or 6 months.
Um, so it's remarkable difference in the time it takes to onboard somebody. Is that something that you found was an issue at other departments? I mean, so much we talk about recruiting a lot, And some of the challenges there are some of those challenges based on the process rather than a lack of applicants in some
Yeah.
cases?
Yeah. I mean, in competitive hiring markets, which we are still in today, time to hire is a huge deal. Corporations can turn that around real fast, and people can go from a prospect on the list to, sitting in their organization very fast. Now, there's a variety of reasons in government, with various, civil service processes and so forth. But I work with departments all around the country, and I have over the past, really 15 years. I'm thinking through, how to make that more efficient. Now, different places are different, right? Some places a written examination is administered by a civil service process, so it's separate from the police department. Other places have, various components outsourced. But the number one piece that I've found in all of these different jurisdictions that I've worked with, big cities to small jurisdictions, is not an intentional focus and, and really every day looking at inefficiencies and trying to improve them, right? And so I look at everything that I touch as trying to do it better the next day. And so, these hiring processes, a lot of them are stale. They're using questionnaires from 30 years ago, right? Social media or, the internet is this abstract concept of a MySpace page or whatever, and when they're asking about social media now, it's not considering like Venmo is social media, right? And, all these different things that we don't think of as like Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, or X or whatever as being, the only social media platform. So, agencies really have to be focused and thinking about like, what are the industry trends? How can we incorporate technology? How can we improve this? And make it something where applicants feel valued. Like right now, if I'm given advice here in 2025 to different applicants that are or different agencies that are considering the application process, it's about ways to make the experience friendly for their applicant. Gone are the days where the goal of an application process are scaring people away.
Right.
And where you have a plethora of candidates and you're saying, oh, well, we'll just take two or three. But agencies have to be creating a experience for the candidates that makes them want to work at their organization. I
Mhm.
mean, and candidates should also want to work for a department that is treating them right through an application process, right? I don't think that's I mean, I know there's cultural stigma around that, but there's no reason that anyone would want to work in an organization that's dysfunctional, that's disorganized. I mean, if that's your experience coming in, it's not going to get better over the course of your career. So, departments that are very savvy with this are creating that focus on a on a really a recruitment mentality. How do we get them in the door? How do we keep them engaged during that process? And how do we make sure they feel valued and want to work for our department? And I'm seeing that more with small agencies right now, and frankly, sheriff's offices where there's a political leader of
Mhm.
that agency in a different way.
Mhm. Um, I didn't expect to wanna stick with recruiting as much as I do.
That's fine, and we can
Like,
come back to it because I've been involved with recruitment all throughout the career. So
yeah. Well, I'm just curious, were there challenges to implementing some of those changes? Like what are what's someone facing within a department who wants to change this process? Are there people there that don't want that to change because they feel like that's a tried and tested method for recruiting?
Tom, I have stories to tell you when we are not recorded about that question, and I'm happy to do so. But what I will say is, yeah, I mean, any change in any sort of system, whether it's a corporate institution or government institution, there is a segment of any workforce or organization that doesn't want change, right? Whether it's fear for their job being, eliminated or replaced, or whether it's, comfort with the routine of what they're doing. But there's a way to engage folks in doing that. And I was very fortunate when I came to the recruiting division as the program manager. I had already been working with them as an IT person for years before. So I knew I had great support from the investigators that were doing this work day in and day out and really understood the work. I listened to them, right? Most of the ideas that we implemented came from them. I just simply helped to make sure that they had the spotlight and that we could actually move them through policy and so forth. And, and that strategy was helpful. There were many folks along the way at various different portions of the system, not even just internally to the department, but externally within the system that, didn't want to change what was happening. I'm a pretty persistent type person. And so I look at it and I look at a lot of things in law enforcement as, you come out a door ready to fight and, you get knocked down pretty quickly.
Mhm.
And you realize that you need to go back in the door you came and come out a different door when there's different politics, when there's different opportunities, when you can bring a different coalition to the table. And what I saw is, success bred more success. So as we started to get kind of initial successes around the process improvement, as investigators started saying, hey, this technology thing really works, it's making my job easier, as we started to see people saying, wow, the applicants are actually sending letters saying that they, really appreciated us, and like that bred more success and more openness to change. Some people along the way never wanted to change, right? And there's a strategy there too.
Mhm.
But what I will say is, yeah, met with fierce resistance. But I've always been the type of person to try to build a coalition big enough for people to come along and to hear their ideas, and the ones that are viable, we try them. We used a lot of data. There were things that I did along the way that didn't work, or I wouldn't repeat, but that's learning. I mean, when I stepped into this role as program manager of the recruiting division, I was 22 years old.
Wow.
And as I look back, that was a crazy amount of risk that the chief took on making that. It paid off. And the various directors of recruiting that I worked with, the various the teams that I work with, we saw the success over time. But part of this took risk in terms of even trying a new approach, and having a leader that was willing to say, hey, we can't fail at hiring. We're currently failing at hiring.
Mhm.
We have to do something different, and the idea that we had and put forward really worked at that time.
Mhm. Yep, credibility is important, right? You
Absolutely.
go into a situation and try to make changes. They need to know that they can trust you, and that credibility comes with time in a lot
Yep.
of cases.
And believe me, I knew what was stake. Right? If I didn't deliver, Um, I was going to be looking. I might be back as a math teacher somewhere, right? So I knew that my job was not only to change process, but it was also to lead the team in terms of being able to deliver that. And at that point, we were trying to hire 30 to 35 a month, and we were filling every single class.
Yeah.
Now the job market is different than it is today. Frankly, the generation is different. There's a lot of things that have changed, and I've seen grow and evolve over time. But there's even more opportunities today to improve processes than existed back in 2012 to 2014.
Mhm. Yeah. Let's jump into your role at Homeland Security, the Advisory Council.
Absolutely.
How did you come across that, and what was some of your experience there?
Yeah, so early in my career, still, I was interested in learning different systems, and experiencing kind of different perspectives. At that point, I was just wrapping up my master's degree at Johns Hopkins. Uh, Through some folks that I knew through the police department that were very connected on a national stage, I had the opportunity to interview multiple times, and be appointed as the director of the Homeland Security Advisory Council, then for Secretary Jay Johnson. But the Homeland Security Advisory Council is a very interesting entity within the US Department of Homeland Security. That council represents about 35 corporate executives, CEOs of airlines and major organization, distinguished chiefs. Like one of the chiefs, actually both of the chiefs sitting over your shoulder, were on the Homeland Security Advisory Council at the time that I was there. And really, the opportunity was to advise the secretary on issues related to Homeland Security. Some were law enforcement, some were corporate interests, and so forth, but met and got to work with an incredible pool of talent of just people that have distinguished themselves. I mean, one of the individuals on there was Judge William Webster, who's the only person who's ever been the head of both CIA and FBI. And to spend time in the room with them to think through issues of foreign fighters or FEMA grants, or any of these topics to help better inform the secretary of DHS. It was a considerable honor.
Hmm. So what were some of your responsibilities as the executive director?
Yeah, as the director for the HSAC, really what I was responsible for was keeping the orchestra moving. So there'd be requests coming from the secretary's office about things they wanted to have input, and whether that was a call, whether that was a meeting, or whether that was a formal task force like the four that we stood up during my tenure there. The formal task force would be pulling together either members of the committee or others, and in that we would essentially seek to answer questions or guide the secretary. Now it's a policy group, right? It's in the office of policy, so you have to be asked the right question. You have to get the right people together. They have to produce something that's useful. The report has to get written. It has to get submitted through DHS channels. The email has to get open and read or briefed in a way. And the reality is that work had great impact on advising the secretary, and if adopted, would make really substantial national changes to various interests for DHS. And the council is still alive and well today within DHS. But it's also an advisory group, right? So those recommendations, they're recommendations. They're not binding, but really they were individuals at the secretary at that time, and still to this time, that they rely upon to help them navigate complex situations around our country.
Hmm.
So my role specifically, meeting planning, report writing, background research, conversations with board members, conveying their points internally, and really orchestrating that council and committee.
And then you left there back to MPD?
I did. I came back. So Chief Lanier was our chief of police at the time, and I
Was
had the
she the
great
chief,
fortune.
when you were there before?
She was.
Oh, okay.
She was, and I had the great fortune of coming back as chief of staff for our Strategic Services Bureau, overseeing recruiting, training, discipline, different areas around, really personnel services. Also, the Office of Policy was within the Strategic Services Bureau.
And then had your perspective changed at all? I mean, was there anything kind of different than when you were there before? Was there any kind of, personal goal that you had in terms of what you wanted your role there to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I alluded to this in my answer with the Homeland Security Advisory Council. Fascinating role on the federal level, but you miss the impact of local communities. And so when I came back to the police department, now I've been promoted several times over. Really my thought process was, how do we have the best police department with the best employees that drive change in the community and help really meet the community needs. So, during that time, we started our community engagement academy, and I led the first cohort, and now it's in the 30 something cohort of that program. I know they have the pleasure of visiting you at the National Law Enforcement
Leadership.
Museum every time. And really being able to think about ways to have a more thoughtful training environment. So I led an effort with a variety of other stakeholders within the department to rewrite all the academy curriculum. And we went from the ground up, similar to what we did with recruiting, we did it with training, right? And every one of the curriculum modules that's now available on our website publicly, and I say the Metropolitan Police Department's website publicly,
Hmm.
was all something that was written during that time. And obviously it's been updated and edited, but we started from the ground up about how officers should be trained.
And all that's available online. How officers are trained and the information they're trained on?
Yep. It's all available on the public transparency page. Years later, I think about 2021 or 2022, when I was serving as chief of staff, we made all that information public and allows for community input on that curriculum. And,
Mhm.
the department does factor in through their curriculum change process any community feedback. Now, sensitive lesson plans about like, how we're clearing a building, that's not available public. But,
Yeah.
all the rest is, right? Now, what's up there is the instructional aid. It's the narrative really of the core components of that. But all that curriculum was written back in the 26 15 16 and 17 era.
Yeah, I was gonna ask who was involved in that process? Is it a lot of people, few people?
A lot of people.
What's
So
the
the,
yeah, what's the process for engaging in something like that?
Yeah, we had a wonderful team. It was led by a sergeant and had four officers. They really, deconstructed and reconstructed the academy curriculum and made it from rote memorization to trying to interconnect concepts. So what we started with was, you can go through a police academy before this time. You could go through essentially get a 70% on the test and be a graduate, right? And I think you and I, as citizens, would not want the officer showing up at our door that knows 70% of the law, 70% of the procedures, 70% of anything, right? So we wanted to move to a concept of 100% mastery. And so involved were SMEs, officers who did this every single day. We also had like director of policy, director of legal counsel. We had a variety of different curriculum individuals that were involved. And so there were a series of reviews after any block would be done. But the idea was rather than spending 80 hours with you on DC code and law, we'd instead spend kind of an intermixed period of time learning first about like how to interact with people. Next, how to stop people. Next, we add in some case law about that. Next, like okay, we'll add in a car, we'll make it more complex. The car is moving. And so it became an iterative curriculum. Now, I mean, if I had years and years more and unlimited resources, I have ways to continue to do this. And you can read all about it in my dissertation that will be available. But, I say that to say, we made an initial attempt, and that is what it was. And I think the curriculum that was put in place was substantially better than what it replaced. And the other idea behind it was rather than rote memorization, where an instructor would read to you a lesson plan and then have you write down every word they said, we'd give you the materials. Great. If you come in already knowing the answers to the test, great,
Mhm. Mhm.
fantastic. We want you to internalize that. We want you, to really understand and be able to apply that because that is going to make you a better officer.
Mhm. Yeah. And also I wanted to touch on just briefly your volunteer officer roles. So, you know, in addition to all the work that you're doing, professionally in your career and the education that you're undertaking, you also volunteer time as an officer.
I do. This started first in 2010 in Annapolis, Maryland. I was an auxiliary officer with Annapolis, Maryland PD from around 2010 to 2014. But in 2011, I had the opportunity to go through the Metropolitan Police Academy. DC has an amazing reserve police program. And police officers that go through the reserve program are full police officers in the District of Columbia. They wear the same uniform, they have the same duties and authorities. They've gone through the same background, they have the same training, and they have the same responsibilities when they're out there. A lieutenant that I was working with at the time said, "Hey, you really should go through this because once you go through it, same thing that I've already said about education, like no one can take that from you. Like once you go through that experience, you're far more knowledgeable about what the profession is." And I got into the academy. Our academy class started with 20 people. It graduated with six of us. Three of us are still on the department in some form of capacity. And what was really interesting and insightful to me was really understanding at a ground level of what policing is. And I happen to really enjoy being a police officer and a reservist in the city, and had the pleasure and have the pleasure of serving in all seven different districts and really getting to understand American policing in a whole different way through that opportunity.
So I want to touch on the work that you did at Rutgers. Uh,
Absolutely.
how does that fall into your role at MPD? Was it a separate thing? 'Cause it was concurrent with your role there. Am I correct?
Yeah, yeah. So I became a fellow a few years back. I don't remember the exact year, but probably 2020, 2021, somewhere therein. But I had maintained really good connection with many of the folks back on the Homeland Security Advisory Council, and one of those individuals was at Rutgers University, and serving in a very senior capacity there. And I done work over the years with that individual, and so was invited in to be a fellow at Rutgers and to really work with police academy leaders all around the country and a bunch of other initiatives like the I-95 gun violence initiative. Every year, there's a conference that's pulled together looking
Yeah, I
at
think that just happened, didn't it?
yeah, just a
Yeah.
couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
It's usually around February every single year, and and in that conference, we're really looking at illegal firearms trafficking all up and down the I-95 corridor, and now it's spreading to I-10 and other locations.
Mm.
But the idea behind that is getting the key stakeholders together for exchange of information and ideas, and so I support that work, and Rutgers in that it was very complimentary. I realized early in my career the benefit of having educational and academic institutions involved with law enforcement, to help bring people together, get different insights and perspectives. I'd worked a lot with Howard University, UGW, Georgetown, bunch of different universities in DC. But Rutgers Center on Policing, the Miller Center on Policing and Community Resilience had some really interesting kind of initiatives that were underway there. And so it was a great pleasure when they asked, invited, and offered me to be a fellow there. And I'm still there very proudly today.
Oh, great. So what's the role of a fellow? What were your contributions or anything that you're kind of proud of contributing there?
Yeah, so a lot of convenings where we've pulled people together, issues and topics around law enforcement training. We've had several conferences on that. Gun violence, as I mentioned, we've done work internationally on different community policing initiatives in Sweden and other locations. As I look and say, what am I most proud of there? It's really a program that I'll hopefully get to talk about while I talk about my current role, but it's bringing distinguished police leaders to Poland to march between Auschwitz and Birkenau in commemoration of the victims and survivors of horrible incidents in Nazi Germany back in World War II era. And so I can talk about that certainly a little bit later. But that has been a program that's been very deeply personal to me, and something that I participated in. This will be the third year in a row, and I anticipate going for as many years as I'm physically able.
Awesome. Yes, we will eventually get to your role at University of Virginia. I promise.
No,
One
no
last
worries.
thing. Well, I think it's just important to, especially this program at University of Virginia is pretty new, and I think you're somebody that is extremely well known in the law enforcement community, and for people who are not familiar with you, I really want them to know, um, you know who the individuals are that are behind these initiatives, and really their credibility, right? Like, credibility is important, and I think just spending a little bit of time kind of walking through your past here, which I'll enjoy doing with our other guests in this series as well. I think it's just really important for people to kind of get a sense of your background. And so my last thing is your own work that you do consulting. Can you talk just a little bit about that? How that got off the ground? This could also be useful for people who are thinking to themselves, I want to strike out on my own, and I got a lot of really great connections. So talk just a little bit about that experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get to how I got involved in that, let me just kind of give the tail end of the MPD career. And so,
Yeah.
for the last, really picking up for where I left off there, the last 8 years there, I served as chief of staff over technical services, so all the IT services for the department. Then ran all of the volunteer programs for the agency, to include our reservist program. For 4 years, as I served as the executive director, bureau chief over professional development, so recruiting, training, discipline, HR, EEO investigations, all aspects of really setting the broad strategy around personnel services. And then for the final 3 years with the agency, I was chief of staff. And so as chief of staff, I was responsible still for the personnel services, for any of our communication services, as well as a variety of different kind of strategic initiatives, more broadly, legal aspects, labor relations aspects, working with our unions, which is something that I held very near and dear. And when I made the transition out of the Metropolitan Police Department, I knew I still wanted to be involved in public safety in many different ways. And so, through private LLC type work and working with a variety of different national organizations, I have the amazing pleasure right now of supporting departments all around the country, primarily around technology, recruitment issues, training issues. But what I've gotten to see through that is departments big and small, they all have unique problems and challenges. And a lot of what is great about our country in terms of the federalism and 18,000 different agencies with their own policies and their own cultures is also the challenge, right? Lessons learned in one part of our country are, and lessons that departments really know, like we got to do it this way. In another part of the country, no one got that lesson, right? And so you see the same issues repeated over and over again, different than you do in places that have a more nationalized model. I'm not here arguing for a national model. There's a lot of reasons that federalism is amazing, right? But I am saying that there's a lot of opportunities for departments to learn from each other. And so, one of the things that I do is really working with agencies on some of those best practices, and whether it's auditing, a kind of a process and procedure and giving them recommendations, or helping them develop something directly, or leading a summit for their executive staff. Those are some of the great opportunities that I have currently through my consulting world.
Um, did the international piece, that, with your PhD, was that connected to Rutgers, and your work there?
Yeah, so the initial trip where I met the university where I'm studying was through a Rutgers University trip. So it's the way that the world of connections works.
Right.
And so that just opened the door, and I've been back there many, many, many times as I continue that journey.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into University of Virginia.
Sounds good.
All right. So walk us through, um, you getting to University of Virginia. Tell us a little bit about that program as a whole. I'm curious. I'm probably going to just throw a bunch of questions out there, and if you miss any, I'll state them again. But transitioning from a law enforcement department, right, into a university and campus culture, must have been a really interesting experience. Although you're clearly familiar with the academic, side of things with all of your educational pursuits, but in terms of working within that environment, that must have been different. And so, anyway, I'll just start there. But curious, kind of how it all started.
Yeah, so I had the great fortune of kind of knowing of the University of Virginia. The National Academy obviously is something anyone in policing knows of. And when I left the Metropolitan Police Department, an opportunity at UVA, it kind of presented itself, and I put my name in the hat, and through many series of conversations and interviews, they painted a picture specifically of building a new Center for Public Safety and Justice. And the center would work very closely with their relationship with the FBI National Academy. It would work, closely with the Master of Public Safety program. It would work very closely with some research and some, other components. And what really impressed me was, the faculty and staff at the University of Virginia were really dedicated practitioners that knew their craft. Most of them retired chiefs of police in different jurisdiction, very high level, kind of government individuals. But they really believed in policing and good policing. There was a kind of, I don't think this will be lost on any of the viewers, but in some of the academic worlds, uh, policing shouldn't exist. And it just, it's kind of a whole movement away from that. But at the University of Virginia, it very much was centered in, we want well, informed, thoughtful leaders that are doing exceptional work in policing to keep communities safe, to drive down violent crime, and really to make an impact in public safety and justice. And so they painted this vision for me of what the center would be. I had the great fortune of being selected to be the inaugural executive director. And the center really has three primary kind of areas of responsibility. The first is around education. The second is around research. And the third is around networking and innovation. And each of those three different areas have different components. In the educational world, we not only have our master's program, it's since 2021, there's over 450 students and graduates in all 50 states and international representation. It's an amazing program, and everywhere that I go in the country, when I'm doing the command staff lecture or similar, there's someone in the room that's a graduate of the MPAS program already. It has not failed me in the last year to have a graduate in one of the rooms that I'm in. But then, they also have a 20-year relationship with the Virginia State Police and a command college, that really has made, an impact for so many leaders in the Virginia area. So the educational mission continues to grow. We just announced, and this fall we will launch a bachelor's completion program for public safety leaders. So for individuals that have, some credits but don't have a degree, to help them there. Hopefully some will continue on to their master's education and become double who's at UVA. But again, I'm not the person to say, hey, you have to get it here, right? I want people to continue to learn. And I think, what we have in our educational realm, and I'm doing a shameless plug, but is a really exceptional program with pracademics, right? Practitioners that have gone academic and can relate to that experience. So, the innovation, we're bringing people together for conferences, and I can talk a little bit more about that later. But also, panel series where we're bringing people together for a variety of different kind of thought leadership pieces. What I'll say is there was enough of the culture that I was familiar with to make the transition easy, right?
Yeah.
So, the faculty that I have the pleasure to work with and call my colleagues, they come from law enforcement, fire departments, corrections environments, but enough of the same culture where, like, hey, different agencies, but we know how that kind of works, right?
Right.
And similarly, the student base that I work with are police chiefs, deputy chiefs, they're police leaders from all around the country. They're in environments just like where I came from. The University of Virginia is a large government organization. It's an academic organization, but it's not dissimilar from a federal government or DC government. There's systems and processes and people and opportunities and obstacles all at the same time. But what I found is the University of Virginia, compared to the other places that I've been, has been amazingly nimble at creating initiatives really aimed to serve public safety leaders, and we're doing that every single day. And really, there's some exciting things ahead.
So I didn't know that they played a big role in the National Academy. Um, and so they have that piece, they have the master's program. So how does the center fit? Why was the center a missing piece? What was the kind of, you know, idea behind needing to create that?
Well, and the University of Virginia has other programs with various federal and local law enforcement as well. And it had grown to the point, in particular, the Master of Public Safety program, that this wasn't just a random one-off program, right? And the university, I think, and this predates me, but understood really the potential of having a pro public safety, pro law enforcement, um, pragmatic, thoughtful center that could advance and help chiefs of police think through different issues, right? Chiefs are always caught at the center of debates, right? No matter what debate, what community debate you put, chiefs are caught in the middle of it, right? They have people on one side that feel one way and another side think the other way. And being able to help them with, the kind of how to navigate, their decision making, moving, kind of community safety and law enforcement goals forward, was there. So I think as the University of Virginia kind of looked at this, they said, look, this has grown beyond just a master's program. We have the opportunity to launch a bachelor's program. We're currently in the process of exploring other academic pieces at a higher, even higher education levels. And with that, gives really a forum and a platform to interconnect the program. So now you can have faculty that's teaching in the command college that teaches in the master's program and so forth. And so, the center really is that umbrella structure that will give life to the research agenda, some of the networking agendas, to working with partners, nonprofit partners, and we're working with organizations and associations all around the country, and on various different initiatives. It's one thing if you're like, hey, we're a master's program doing that. It's another thing when it's, an actual formal center. It also demonstrates a commitment from the university to
Mhm.
really be serious around public safety.
Mhm. Yeah. Are there other universities that have similar models? Is there anything that you guys are looking at for inspiration, or do you find that what you all are creating is unique?
So I'm not trying to recreate any wheels that exist, right? And so wheels that exist, I encourage people to do. Like I've benefited from so many programs as we talked about. There are many other university-based program centers, and some have different focuses, right? Some are around alternatives to policing, some are on, community safety and resilience, some are on, violence interruption. Like, when it comes to actual policing programs, there's some excellent programs around the country, right? And just like people have choice of where they want to go and and study for undergraduate or others, people should have that opportunity as they're in law enforcement, public safety careers to be able to broaden, and take advantage of that. I do think what we're creating at UVA is different and special.
Mm,
And I think part of that is the people that are involved. It's a coalition of the willing. We have an amazing board of advisors of individuals just from all walks of life that have run departments big and small or are running them currently. And I think what people will see at the University of Virginia is a track record, decades and decades of track record of helping advance public safety leaders through education. And if I'm successful with that, we will continue to partner with anyone who's a willing partner, and really build the opportunity. And that might be with other universities that have similar programs. Just like and right now we have, and I alluded to this earlier, but we built with Rutgers University a 4 credit,
mm,
a 3 credit hour, 4 credit graduate level program, contemporary issues of leadership program, looking at the role of Battalion 101 in Nazi Germany. We bring people to Poland. We talk around contemporary issues of radicalization and so forth. And again, this is a really contemporary for police chiefs to be able to have this forum and discourse and so forth. And so Rutgers is the lead on it. We're supporting it, but partnering with other universities that have things that are similar in this space. And so, we're looking forward to really bringing forward that kind of thoughtful leadership and partnership with other organizations too. So
yeah,
to answer the question, yeah, there's other things that are out there, but I don't think any are the same.
right, right. Well, and to go back to the importance of highlighting your background. I mean, you're able to pull so many of your experiences into what you're doing here to enhance this program, and I think that's important for people to remember that sometimes the thing that you're doing now is going to have a consequence in the future that you don't even know about yet.
So I'll give you a story on that one. So this past fall, I had the pleasure of speaking at IACP on a panel on civilian leaders in law enforcement. I thought I'd walk in the room and there would be nobody in that room, right? And really anticipated the panel and I just having a
All gonna
great.
come to see you, Ben.
No, well, it wasn't, but they were interested in the topic, right? And so when we walked in the room, there was probably, 150, 200 people that were sitting there. And literally all of our thought was, oh, they're here from the last panel. They're not sticking around. And then they stayed, right? And then they
Yeah.
asked a lot of questions, but it really hit a vein for us of like, wow, there's a missing link between, budget directors and,
Mhm.
and IT directors and folks that are supporting law enforcement every day and frankly leading in various different agencies, different aspects of work, communications directors and so forth. So from that, at the University of Virginia, we pulled together 12 different departments around the country. We have in April, we have what we're calling our Leading Without a Badge Summit. We have well over 160 people already coming to this, but really distinguished names in their respective agencies, 70 departments represented. But again, that opportunity to pull together and to fill a need that wasn't being met, and that will be the start of many subsequent conferences and probably tailoring even further on that. But that's really the opportunity to find those ways to really create unique forums.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant program, and I'm really excited to see that grow. I think that it is important role, and there are important roles within law enforcement that we don't get to know about. But they help the engine run, and
They do.
make a big difference in terms of how departments and agencies operate. So I think it's a great start. What was some of the campus response or your local community to this program, if any? I assume with
Yeah.
some of the programs you guys have been doing in person, are students showing up? Is there interest in this kind of outside of the law enforcement community?
Yeah, so our students are really national. A lot of what we do are through synchronous virtual sessions or convenings. The local community, we have great ties with the city of Charlottesville, with the local county, with the state police. When we were announced the center, there was overwhelmingly positive support. Of course, we have the critics that come out to say, well, we don't need more police. We don't need education around that. And I would push back on that, holistically to say, I think everyone wants their public safety leaders, their law enforcement to be thoughtful, to be pragmatic, to be, well informed, and all of that stuff, right? And any of the folks that were critical of what the center could be, I invited for a conversation, and still to this day, I'll have that conversation because I want them part of it. I think everyone has the right and deserves the right to have public safety that reflects their community.
Mhm.
And what that is, well, there's going to be difference between us, right? But that voice in the conversation is very important. And so, the few voices we heard that didn't want more law enforcement programs, we invited them to be a part, and frankly, they've either been supportive or neutral,
Mhm.
since that point.
Has there been challenges within the university just in terms of standing up the programs or,
No,
um, I'm
no.
thinking of a young 22-year-old Ben Heyman who is trying to, make changes within MPD. Have you faced anything kind of similar within the
No.
university?
The University of Virginia has been incredibly supportive. And, I have the great fortune of working directly for one of the 12 deans of the school, Dean Melissa Lubin. She has been extremely supportive of law enforcement and, and good policing. And that has made it so much easier. The faculty, I kind of had to like almost stop myself to say like, wow, everyone wants to help. And that has been a different challenge of
Yeah,
like,
true. Yeah, good point.
from from budget to finance to admissions to enrollment, like people are like, oh yeah, we can do that, we can get that done, and the huge change that I had from an operational culture of like people in education and academia, they write very long emails and they're
Right.
very thoughtful and they're
Yeah.
very detailed, and they
Yeah.
take a long time to reply to. And I'm just used to one sentence replies like, yeah, looks good. No, it needs
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So, that definitely is a different environment. But I can say, hands down, the support, the experience, the perspective that the team at the University of Virginia has brought. We sit within the School of Continuing and Professional Studies, and that support that the school has on expanding the law enforcement is the only reason that we've made this much momentum in such a short period of time, from the communication strategy to student outreach and engagement to, really thinking through like how do we get chiefs who have a big job and, and are doing this to also be able to be graduate level students and support them. What I've experienced at UVA is just hands down amazing, and I've talked to, and it's kind of funny as I go to conferences, I'll introduce myself, and I always end up sitting next to someone who's a graduate of UVA, and they always bend my ear, and they're like, "Hey, that program was awesome. It got me thinking different ways. It prepared me for my next promotion." And hearing that, just it's fuel on my fire to say, "All right, what can we do more of this? How can we expand this?" And again, it's not about just UVA program, but how do we bring resources and support to law enforcement for them to be more effective at the work they do in their community.
So going back to the Leading Without a Badge summit, what are some of the roles that you think would be the most helpful that departments don't typically have that they might want to consider?
I mean, I think it depends on the type of agency, the nature. Obviously, my experience is primarily with major city
Yeah.
environments and larger departments, but you have to position non-sworn individuals for success. And what I mean by that is if you have them in a position that's requiring arrest authority, they're going to fail all day long. Uh, and culturally, politically, all of that. But there's a lot of skill sets that aren't a law enforcement skill set. Being a director of IT. Now, some law enforcement officers gain that skill set, but it's
Mhm.
not inherently a law enforcement skill set. Uh,
Mhm.
Legal counsel. Some cops become lawyers, but being a general counsel for a department is not inherently a police officer skill set. being a communications director. There's many great sworn communications directors. That's a learned skill set, right? And so any of these roles, having the right professional staff member that can step in and serve in that capacity, really can pay dividends for that agency. It can't be just a plug and play, right? You can't just bring someone in who's an excellent communications director somewhere else and expect them to be successful in a public safety environment. There has to be intentional onboarding. There has to be familiarization with culture and all of that goes into it. But I would say there's a wide range in every agency of roles, and chiefs that are listening to this know they have cops, badges, and guns sitting in roles that they don't have the proper training and resources to do. And
Mhm.
those are the roles that you start with, right? And so in my past experience, we civilianized positions, and some of them were controversial in the civilianization, but we did it in a way where it's about bringing in the right person. Sometimes it's an overlap. It's having a sworn member work with a civilian for a year. But again, do they need power of arrest? Are they writing warrants? Right? If they're not doing police stuff, then you probably can evaluate that role of whether it really needs to be a badge and a gun. Now, the indoctrination, the familiarization with the culture, including them in decision making, is a success or failure. If you bring in really successful professional staff members, but you don't give them the tools and resources to inform, you don't let them supervise, you don't let them do things that are necessary to do the job right, departments are going to fail with that. But departments around the country, and I know many chiefs that have been very thoughtful with how they've leveraged civilians, and in that they've gotten just really, talented pool of individual that supplements their mission and allows their sworn members to be even that much more effective.
So within the summit, does that include helping departments learn how to onboard those civilians? Is that something that
That'll be one of the panels. But again, I think when we have this conversation, even the name of the conference, we had 30 different iterations, right? So if you say civilian, some will say, well, that's an old term, and technically, even uniformed law enforcement are civilian; they're not the military. If you say
Mhm.
professional staff, it makes the argument of does that mean everyone else is unprofessional, right?
Right.
If you say unsworn, well, civilians take an oath. That's a government oath, and frankly, it's very similar to the sworn oath. So
Mhm.
they're not, so vernacular is very difficult. And then when you get into the conversation, the civilianization more broadly, there's a lot of different roles on the department, property clerks and, vehicle maintenance officers and those type of things. Those are line staff level positions. A lot of departments have secretaries now, clerical assistants, administrative assistants, but then this is also a conversation around leadership. And so this particular conference is focused on leadership, records managers, IT directors, comms directors, chief, operating officers, chiefs of staff, those type of roles and positions that serve in influential positions in state policing organizations and federal law enforcement, and the list goes on beyond that, right? And so there's so many different aspects of this community. If you look at big agencies, a fifth to a quarter of their department are non-sworn civilian professional staff. You get the point. Different roles. And so we're focused specifically here on leadership positions, but over time we'll also broaden that to roles like civilian analysts or individuals that are helping inform various decisions that are being made by agencies.
Mhm. And then can you talk a little bit about your speaker series? What are some of the conversations that you all are having, and how does kind of all this play into what you're trying to build now or some of your long-term goals?
Yeah, so the speaker series, every single month we have a different panel series. It's collection of topics, whether it's disaster response or whether it's on AI and policing, whether we're looking at mental health or whatever we're looking at. We bring together either virtual or in person some distinguished professionals, and we have a conversation. Generally 45 minutes to an hour with some questions from our audience. For the past few that we've done, we usually have audiences 300 to 500 folks that tune in to listen, and really, kind of get a sense of a conversation. Last month, we had one on international policing, and we heard from the head of the operational bureau in Estonia, to a colleague in Scotland, to the former head of Interpol here in DC, and just learned from their perspectives around international cooperation, partnerships, and various pieces. Part of that is creating community, and it's creating kind of that opportunity for broader exposure. A lot of what we're doing, whether it's our different conferences like the Emergency Operations Centers of the Future, or Leading Without a Badge, or any of these different things, it's about giving a form and a format for people to be able to interact with each other. So much of what I've been able to do and experience in law enforcement were doors that were opened, right? They were invitations to different conversations, to meeting different people, to exchanging ideas. And I'm trying to create, one of the real core pieces with the center is creating that environment where people can have honest dialogue, can disagree. You might have very different perspectives than I do on something, and that's fine. And right now, I think that there's a lot of people that really want to know, what is your opinion on this? What is your opinion? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? As opposed to saying, um, what facts do you know? What facts do I know? And
Mm-hmm.
then let's look through that body of facts, and then, like, what's our opinion on that? But we're really quick to judge and to rush to this, have to have an opinion on everything, as opposed to really getting an understanding and an in-depth knowledge. Like, there's a ton of topics that are being discussed around law enforcement circles, and the proper answer for me is, I don't know. I'm not a SWAT negotiator, right? I'm not an expert on this. But if I got the person who is to give me some facts, I could then have a better and more informed opinion. And so, I think one of the things we're really trying to do is create that space, whether it's through panel series or conferences or so forth, for that kind of dialogue, and frankly, for disagreement. I think it's perfectly fine if we walk out and say, I just see it differently. I'm going to do this in my organization, you do this in yours. And that's okay, because you're responding to a different community than I'm responding to. It doesn't have to be homogenous. We don't have a national police service. And so that's some of the opportunity to have, those healthy conversations. I know that's not popular in a very polarized environment.
Yeah. Well, having those conversations are important, and I think starting those conversations off with facts is a good place.
Yep.
What role does international law enforcement play within our world here in the United States? Are our officers engaged in learning from other countries? Is that common? Is it, you know, uh, if it isn't, should it be, more common?
Uh, you know, there are some, but very few, right? And part of it is access and opportunity to do so. And I don't take for granted that I've had some very unique opportunities and access. This past year, I participated in the Capital Chiefs of Europe Summit. I was the only American in the room, with chiefs from over 30 different capital cities in Europe, the chief and their number twos, right? And that just broadens the aperture to think about these issues. What I would say is, we don't spend enough time learning from each other in this country, right?
Yeah.
And then if you add in an international lens, it's even more dismal, the story around that. And so, I have this conversation with our faculty all the time. Can you tell me right now any of the lessons learned, from the gun trace task force report in Baltimore, or the Freddie Gray case, or the Derek Chauvin case, or any of this stuff, right? Like, can you tell me any of the lessons learned? No, right? And you go to chiefs, and you ask these questions, and they're not, going back and looking at tragedies in policing. And one of the things we did at MPD is we actually had, our executives read different reports and brief out on them, and what we found every time we did that was, we might still be doing something similar to this, maybe not the same, but
Right.
enough where we wanted to have those kind of critical conversations. And so, I think the more that law enforcement leaders can get involved in associations, in professional development kind of circles, leadership programs, any of that, it gives them an aperture to have conversations with their own internal agency, to say, like, hey, what's different? The DC Leadership Academy is a great example of that. 70 folks come together. They're in, I think they're in their fourth or fifth cohort right now. but it really pulls together that different ideology and getting people to say like, well, what do you do on this? Well, how do you do? And that network is very valuable. SMIP from perf is another example of that. The National Academy for many people is that forum. But those type of opportunities, the more we can get officers interconnected to share ideas nationally, it'll be helpful, and internationally, I've picked up so many ideas from my international travels and working with law enforcement overseas, and whether it's in Spain or Netherlands, or next week I'll be in Budapest and Lithuania and Estonia on very similar kind of topics. And you can't just like expect to go there and say, oh, I have the magic answer for everything now that I went to wherever. But again, it's just different perspectives that really kind of get differing ideas that leaders can implement.
Are there any? I wonder if some of the disconnect is officers here knowing what other countries have similar law enforcement roles and responsibilities as we do. So are there any countries that are closely modeled to ours, or is ours closely modeled to somewhere else?
I mean, US is huge, right? I mean, the United States has 18,000 agencies. I can point to you many examples of countries that they have one, a single law enforcement agency. But there's parallels, right? Like, so in Spain, there's two large national police services, but then there's kind of regional, what I would call more like state or county services, and then there's municipal towns, which so there's models that aren't so abstract that you can't draw comparisons. Like, we can't easily draw a comparison to a national service. Um, but some of the stuff isn't just like, okay, so if you're looking at a country that has 40,000 officers overall and they have a national recruitment model, are there lessons to be had in that around, how do you recruit for a 4,000 person department? Sure. When I heard Berlin, Germany present on police recruitment, just change out the words and the uniforms and the patches. It's the same challenges around the generation change, social media, like
Sure. Yeah.
literally to a T. And so there are bits and pieces that you can pick up there, but you have to have the creativity then to interpret it back to the culture you want. It's the same thing of when you go to a different law enforcement agency in the US and they'll show you or tell you what they do. You can't just say, well, that doesn't work for me. And I remember this, for example, I went to New Orleans and saw the EPIC program, Ethical Policing is Courageous,
Yeah. Yeah.
way back 2017 or 18. They had a conference on it. And I walked out of
Really
there and I
cool.
said,
Right.
this really works for them. They're really bought into it. I can't take this in its current form and replicate it in my agency because our issues are different than theirs. But when Able came out,
Mhm.
that was a more generic agency sterilized version, meaning it could be more customized and applicable. Like, that was instantly adopted and fit right in with the culture of what we're doing because our officers were already doing that.
Mhm.
And so, I use that example to say, like, thoughtful law enforcement leaders, they should be getting out, they should be talking to peers, they should be, I remember during the pandemic era, like, I called out to LA, there were very similar challenges that they were experiencing. And I'd have a contact there that I'd frequently call and say, like, hey, how are you dealing with this? And the response and details that came back, I was like, okay, got it. I now know better, like, how I might navigate that in my area.
Mhm. Yeah. So I knew Able had grown from Epic in some way. So what they did was just take it so that it could be more applicable to any agency or department.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a similar basis and concept, but they gave a framework for agencies to adopt Epic, it's been adopted by over 350 agencies. And again, it's a good example of one where you know who wouldn't want free training curriculum that is something you probably are already doing in some form or fashion, but actually quality content. It's a win-win-win. But could you go down and just adopt something that another agency was doing and just try to
Right.
change the logos? No, because the examples are contextualized in culture of that agency.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely dive into Able when we talk to Rosa
Please
next.
do.
Yeah, that'll be
She
exciting.
always gives me questions people ask me, so it's wonderful to be able to give her questions.
Yeah. 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 Um, So what are some of the long-term goals for the UVA program?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so we're 4 months into the launch of the center,
Yep.
and I've written a start of a 5-year strategic plan and getting faculty and student input now on that plan. I hope in if we're successful, that people will see us as very viable partners, and that as we have convenings of police leaders. If we want to have kind of thoughtful conversations about how law enforcement can be done most effectively, how we can, really help police leaders grow within organizations and across organizations, that we're at the table for that. I'd love to see our student base grow, the bachelor completion program. Like I have no doubt we'll have, it'll start with one cohort and then I hope multiple, our command college programs are similarly growing. And we'll have more students coming in through MPS. Not everything is about growth, but it's also about impact, right? And I know programs like Naval Postgraduate School, they're phenomenal resources and tools as leaders go throughout their career, to be able to call back upon that network for various situations. And I'm hopeful that people will feel the same about the UVA network that's being created. And so, I don't know, Tom, we might need to do this again in a year or 2 years. And see where we're at and where that vision shapes. But we're very fortunate to have a very distinguished board of advisors on the center, of people that have walked the walk, talked the talk, and are doing or are still in the role. And and hearing their thoughts and their perspective. Frankly, there's more ideas on the table than we have time in the day to get done. But that's part of the challenge that we're navigating.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because, part of the interesting about the series that we're doing is, um, a lot of, your peers and yourself, you guys all support each other in your respective organizations and play a role. And so just talk a little bit about what is the role that the advisory board at UVA plays, and how do they contribute?
Yeah, so it's a coalition of the willing, and what I mean by that is, no one's compensated for being on there,
Mhm.
but it's about shared interest in advocating and advancing the profession, and public safety professions more broadly through education. And so everyone that's on there are people that that I've reached out to, or connected to our center in some form or fashion, that really are working to help our leaders be more successful. And by that I mean, they're working on programs and initiatives to help chiefs, to help deputy chiefs and up and coming rank members to be successful in what they do. And so our board meets quarterly formally as a whole board, but infrequently between then to help with the kind of individual issues. But everybody on there is so deeply committed to really the work of public safety. It's an incredible group. We had a board meeting just last month, and we had over 55 people that were on that board meeting, and they were all chiming in different work groups to help us think through different circumstances. And I think over time, that board will be very influential for just helping departments around the country be thoughtful around their professional development strategy, around research needs, and so forth. And again, there's a lot of folks on there that work for similar, whether it's education or for-profit organizations, but everyone there really cares about law enforcement and having public safety leaders be thoughtful and pragmatic in what they do.
Are there any policies kind of specifically that you guys are focusing on? I mean, when you kind of start thinking about the mission of the center, like what are some areas that you all are looking at focusing on as it relates to law enforcement as a whole?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've kind of hit the area of leadership, right? And so because our students are primarily police leaders,
Mhm.
lieutenant colonels, chiefs, deputy chiefs. A lot of that is more, what do policing executives need, and what can we do to help them think through, whether it's leadership challenges, whether it's policy challenges, but then well informed by Gordon Graham, who's on our faculty, areas of risk. And so we're diving into ways to think about risk, and ways to reduce risk, for law enforcement leaders. There's a lot that some departments have done to reduce and mitigate their risk in ways that are still very pro law enforcement. But like for example, wearing a seatbelt, like that shouldn't be something that's controversial, right? And it is, and in a lot of jurisdictions, the number one reason for officer injury and payouts is office, and I'm sure you see that a lot in the work that you're doing, right? But again, providing actionable information, helping amplify research products that are out there, and looking at the world of risk and risk reduction is something that I can anticipate coming out of the research agenda that's still being set by the center.
Sure. So kind of safety at large.
Yep.
Excellent. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
I'm sure there's a lot of things. I mean, I would say for anyone who's listening to this that's debating whether they want a career in public safety or law enforcement, there's no better opportunity to serve the public. And what I will say is no matter what agency you join, there are opportunities to really impact residents every day. And, one of the greatest, I think, joys of my career with the Metropolitan Police, still to this day, is interacting with residents that are appreciative and thankful for the work that law enforcement does. Now, you don't hear that every day. There's plenty of people that you meet on the worst day of their life. There's plenty of people that have been hurt, and you are the person standing in front of them. But there's also a very wide portion of the public that's eternally grateful for the hard work of law enforcement. And to raise those stories of when officers have done the right thing and help people and save lives and remove people from bad situations and driven down violent crime, gotten illegal guns off the street, all of those aspects. For people that are listening on this and saying, "Well, I'm not sure there, if being in law enforcement is right for me," what I'll say is reach out and explore. Never did someone who wanted to be a high school math teacher think that there would be so many different opportunities, in the field and in the profession. But law enforcement isn't just criminal justice majors. It is all sorts of backgrounds and disciplines, and that's what makes it work. You need differing perspectives. You need a whole range of, kind of experience in order to be very successful as an agency and as individuals. So if you're interested, reach out, any department. Certainly, I'm always happy to connect with anyone, and I'm sure, Tom, you can share, my contact information with the viewers. But we invite people. I invite people to get involved with the University of Virginia, and what we're doing, and similarly, just to connect and get involved with law enforcement.
Excellent. Well said. And I want to thank you, Ben. I probably said this before, but when I came to the museum in 2019, we were really working toward growing a relationship with Metropolitan PD and really just trying to create awareness that the museum was here in Washington, being brand new. And you have always been the consummate professional. Your ability to respond to emails within 24 hours consistently.
The mayor has a policy. It's 24 hours or the next business day. So
Yeah,
but I learned that from Chief Lanier. It was be responsive, right? I mean,
yeah.
and responsiveness matters. So no, absolutely.
Yep, and most of that can happen in one line. That's all I need.
Yep.
Okay, we'll call you later.
Yep.
That's all you need. And it's so important, and it really helped. And I'm sure you are missed. And but I'm confident everybody is wishing you luck in your new journey at UVA.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tom, thanks so much. And the partnership always with the museum is incredible. And I look forward to getting over there. I know we have our command college students coming through there not so long. So
Oh, good,
maybe I'll be able to join them if I'm in town. But thanks so much.
excellent. Thank you so much, Ben.
We hope you found this conversation enlightening and will join us again for another edition of Icons, where we introduce listeners to incredible people working within law enforcement who have had a profound impact on the community. These one-on-one interviews provide insight into their lives and careers so we can better understand their challenges and recognize their bravery, commitment, and sacrifice. The Icon series is not just about contemporary figures in the law enforcement community, but about all those who have served their communities and the world, from now and in the past. Be sure to tune back in with us for future Icons episodes to learn about key figures in American law enforcement history. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.